Hi, Nero here from Investment Rise, and in this video I want to talk about the 5 things you need to consider if you're looking to invest in the Brisbane market right now. I mean, a lot of people will tell you that the Brisbane market is one of the strongest markets for capital growth going forwards in the coming few years, and I certainly agree with that. And we've got CoreLogic, for example, who have said that they expect the Brisbane market to be the strongest market for the next 5 years in terms of capital growth performance. We've got Deloitte Access Economics, who expect that the Brisbane market, or the Queensland market rather, will have the strongest economic growth for the next 4 years from the start of 2018. So there's a lot of data that's talking about the fact that the Brisbane market is expected to come online. We've also got some really strong population growth, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But there are some differences. Yes, I think the Brisbane market is great, but there are some things you really need to consider if you're looking to invest in Brisbane, especially if you're an interstater. So as I said, in this video, I want to talk about the 5 major things to consider. And first and foremost are the flood zones. Look, the Brisbane market has had a big major floods of 2010, 2011, and also in 1974. So the market does flood, so you need to check your flood maps, because in Brisbane they have what they call the 1 in 100 year flood. Now, that doesn't mean, mind you, that the flood only happens once every 100 years. Rather, it actually means there's a 1% chance of the flood happening. Now, from my perspective, if there's any risk whatsoever that I'll be buying in an area that could flood, I don't want to be anywhere near it. All right, so one of the things you want to do is either consult the flood maps, or the other way to do it, especially if interstate investor, is to look at brand new property. Why? Because by law in Queensland, a brand new property cannot be built in an area that's prone to floods. In fact, it must be built a minimum of 1 metre above the highest flood line on record, which I think is still back in 1974. So definitely be considerate of flood zones. Some of the properties in markets that might seem really cheap, please consider whether it's in a floodplain or not, because if you're buying a property for the long term, you just don't want to be in any risk of being in flood zones. Or as I said, stick to the brand new properties. That's the first thing. The second thing is that Brisbane is different to Sydney and Melbourne. What I mean by that is this. In Sydney and Melbourne, we love our units, and we're quite happy to live in apartments and everything else. But in Brisbane, they don't like that. In fact, the Brisbane market is expected to have the biggest oversupply of units, especially in the inner city. In fact, there are some reports right now that say that up to 1 in 5 apartments are sitting there vacant. And many people are selling apartments today for less than they bought back 5 years ago, 6 years ago, if not even longer than that. So stay away from the unit market. Right? You want to stick to houses. All right, and I know it's a little bit different because in Sydney and Melbourne we're happy to buy apartments, but Brisbane, just stay away from the unit market right now. As I record this video, we're sort of halfway through 2018. That would be a big thing. Stay away from the unit market. Number 3, in Sydney and Melbourne, our capital growth begins from the city, the CBD, and then it goes outwards in rings. So that's where the population moves to. We want to be as close as possible to the city. Yet right now in Brisbane, the Australian Bureau of Statistics reports that the population growth is the strongest it's been in several years, which is great for if you're looking to invest there. But where are the people moving to? The strongest population movement is not close to the city. It's actually on the fringes, about sort of 30 kilometres or so away from the CBD. So some of the strongest area for population growth is sort of halfway between Brisbane and the Gold Coast, so out towards Springfield and Ipswich out west, or up north towards the Moreton Bay. Now, mind you, I'm not necessarily saying these are all areas you want to invest in, but this is where the population is moving to. Right? It's not moving towards the city, so don't think that, oh, I've got to buy as close as possible to the city and it's cheaper, especially relative to Sydney or Melbourne. That's not actually a good idea. You want to buy where the people are moving to. And why are people moving further out rather than close to CBD? Well, because in Brisbane, the infrastructure growth is all happening outside the city. Unlike especially in Sydney, where it's all CBD focused and around there, in Brisbane, they're actually putting infrastructure around the city. So you've got new hospitals coming up sort of 30 kilometres away from the city, new shopping centres. So you want to make sure that you go where the jobs growth is, where the people are moving to, and that is on the outer fringes of the city. Then we have the fact that what type of property do you buy when you're looking to buy houses? Because after all, a lot of us here think in Sydney that the bigger the land size, the better. But in Brisbane, bigger land sizes isn't always better. You see, because Queenslanders, they like to have some space, but they don't want to have massive blocks of land that they've got to maintain, especially your tenants don't want to maintain. Even owner-occupiers don't want to have to bother about those big blocks of land. So I've seen many areas where you'll find the properties on sort of 400 to 500 square meters blocks of land, they're going really, really quickly, but there'll be a property sitting on 750 square meters and people think, oh, I should go for that, but it's been sitting there on the market for ages because that's not what the locals want. And as an investor, that's what you need to be looking at. The next thing is that when you look at the property and you're looking at what the features a property should have, one of the key things is air conditioning. Look, we all know that it gets very, very hot up in Brisbane, but what type of air conditioning should you have? Well, if you're looking to buy an investment property up there, and this is going to be rented to tenants, I would not recommend looking at ducted air conditioning. Now, that might seem a little counterintuitive initially because you're going, hold on, if it's hot up there, surely I want to put ducted air conditioning up there. Well, no, actually the opposite is true. You see, because if you have ducted air conditioning, what should happen is, because it gets so hot up there in Brisbane, that your tenant should come into the home, open up the windows, cool the home down a bit, and then put the ducted air conditioning on. But you and I both know they're not going to do that. They're just going to walk into the home and stinking hot and slam the ducted air conditioning unit on. And guess what's going to happen? It's going to break down more frequently, right? So then by having a property with ducted air conditioning, you're paying more up front for the price, but you're also going to have more maintenance issues. So therefore, it's much easier to look at a split system air conditioning unit and then with ceiling fans in other rooms. That's what actually rents more easily as well, and that's what works for that particular market. Again, you've got to understand that when you're buying in a market, whatever market you're buying in, make sure you buy what the locals want, not what necessarily you and I might prefer. And the final thing to consider is the proximity to train stations. Now, what I'm about to say again might seem counterintuitive, but it's very true for the Brisbane market. You see, in Sydney and Melbourne, we want to be within walking distance to a train station. But in Brisbane, they really couldn't care. Yes, it's nice to have, but what's more important is proximity to major arterial roads. You see, in Queensland, even with the new train stations that have come online, the average Queenslander still prefers to drive. And a Queenslander, if they've got to choose between walking distance to a train line versus access to a major road so they can go up and down through Brisbane, they're going to prefer access to the major arterial road. So make sure when you're looking at your investment, see, okay, yeah, train station's fine, but as long as they can drive, a local can drive within 5 to 6 minutes to a train station, they're happy with that. Most of those train stations have big park and goes sort of situation, but also focus on access to major arterial roads because Queenslanders love to drive. So I really hope that sort of helped. If you're looking to invest up in Queensland, make sure you understand that you don't want to bring your Sydney and Melbourne paradigm to Brisbane. Be aware of the flood zones. Look at where the infrastructure and population is moving to. Understand that, look, the Brisbane market has a lot of growth, I believe, in the next few years, driven by the population growth, driven by the price differential. I mean, right now, as of November 2017, there was a 107% price difference between the median price point of Sydney and Brisbane. But the difference in income is only 12.9%. So affordability is not an issue up in Brisbane whatsoever. And that's why I truly believe that Brisbane will join Sydney and Melbourne over the next few years as one of our major international cities. So yes, I believe it's a great market to invest in, but you need to understand the quirks of that market and invest accordingly. And look, if you want some assistance with buying property in Brisbane that have got good rental yields, easy to rent, not in a flood zone whatsoever, look, I'll put a link below this video. Hit us up, contact us, let's see if we can be of assistance to you. And otherwise, look, let me know what you think about this video and investing in Brisbane. Have you bought in Brisbane before? Are you looking to buy in Brisbane? Would love to know your thoughts. Let me know in the comments fields below. And again, if you'd like some assistance, click the link below this video. Bye for now.